Well, I've got a couple of goals here this afternoon. One, of course, is we've got the die-hard dwindling few left in the room. The second is I hope I can keep some of you from your BlackBerries, your Apples, and iPhones and focusing on our conversation. It's been an interesting journey, and what I'm going to share with you this afternoon is very little about PepsiCo and our products, but more about the journey. I've had a chance today to hear a few speakers present their perspectives, and some very interesting perspectives. I would argue with you that many of these perspectives are not mutually exclusive. We've heard about how small and nimble equates with innovation, and therefore it's good. Perhaps. There are examples of that. We've also heard that you need to have depth and scale and the capabilities. And the challenge for somebody like myself at the steering helm of the future and the innovation of a global company like PepsiCo is how do you manage that balance? And how do you ignite the organization to actually not only invest in R&D, sometimes that's a little the easier part of the equation. The tougher part is how do you sustain that investment year after year after year? So let me start with a little challenge. PepsiCo today is about $70 billion in annual revenue. It's 67 point whatever you want to take. So by any criteria, we're pretty big. We operate in 200 countries. Actually 198 is the last time we looked. There's only 2 countries on the planet we don't actually have an operating business on. We reach 1.3 billion consumers every single day. Just think of that number. 1.3 billion people will consume one of my products every 24 hours. Which means we don't reach them virtually through the internet. We don't get them in the cyberspace. We actually have to physically make, move, sell, and actually deliver this product into their pantry or kitchen or restaurant so they consume it. And that requires an amazing logistics, infrastructure, supply chain. So innovation for us is not just the little ingredient that went into that product. Innovation for us is actually innovating everything from the genes and the germplasm of the crop that's going to be grown for us all the way through to the material science of the packaging that's going to be used to package our product and everything in between. So for me as the Chief Scientific Officer and Head of Innovation and now Head of also our sustainability work across the planet, it's really thinking about this as a holistic system because given our scale and our breadth and our depth, we actually do make a difference and have an impact. The challenge when you're our scale, of course, is that if you want to grow 4 or 5% a year, you're talking about growing $5 billion of business every year, year on, year out. We're actually creating the equivalent of many large publicly traded companies every 3 or 4 years. And so I would submit to you when I started this journey almost 8 years ago that we didn't step back and say, well, we've got to now start to look at innovating small or innovating big. We started looking at ourselves and said, how do we put it all together? People think about PepsiCo as, of course, the beverage. That's our branded beverage. If you actually look at where we are, about 20% of our global sales are actually Pepsi-Cola. We are far more diverse than that. These are just some of our products. Now, before I tell you the journey, let me tell you the end result. And I hope that gets you your attention because for the CEOs in the room, for the people who are trying to think about why innovate and why invest, ask yourself a couple of things. We live in a highly competitive environment, there's no question. And once you get to a certain scale in large industries, it is pretty typical that you cannot out-procure your competition. You have scale, so do they. You're not going to get inputs into your business any cheaper and predict future commodities typically any better than your competition. There was a time when you could outsell because you had a larger sales force or you had other mechanisms with social media, the internet, and all of this information flying. You typically cannot any longer outsell and often even out-control the media or out-market or whatever term you want to use because the world in the competitive environment we're in is a great leveling or effect. But the question is, how are you going to outsmart your competition? And that's what I want to talk about. And you're going to outsmart throughout innovation. And if you do outsmart, do out-innovate, you will grow. And I'm going to give you examples of that, because at a time when everybody was saying the food and beverage industry, the CPG industry has its challenges, absolutely. But I have a different perspective. That's why we're paid as managers, right? Isn't that our job? Because if we sit there, can you imagine going to your shareholders and your board of directors and saying, well, actually, I'd love to grow, but I'm really operating in a competitive environment. It's really challenging, and therefore, we're not going to meet our goal this year. Right? It's an interesting discussion. I don't care which business you're in. So let's take a look at it. So 7, 8 years ago, when Indra Nooyi became CEO and chairman, she and the board set about a vision. She articulated as performance with purpose. Not corporate social responsibility. She said performance, which was important, we're a business. Actually, it doesn't matter if you're an academic institute, you're a government, or you're a private sector, it's about performance. Whatever your mission is, it's about performance. But then, for us, it was performance with purpose. And let's talk a little bit about that purpose. It was human sustainability, talent sustainability, and environmental sustainability. Not because these were nice to have, but because from our perspective, and certainly my perspective as the head of that organization, it's a necessity. Without it, we will not have sustainable growth. So I'm not talking about sustainability as a corporate social responsibility, but sustainable growth as a necessity if you're going to think about all of the things we do. And we were at a time when historically we had won at PepsiCo by coming up and launching a new flavor, a new color, a new packaging design. An innovation was any one or a combination of those, and we were known for our distribution might and our marketing finesse. That was our equation. And essentially, it was a push equation. Create the product, we had the muscle, we'll push it into the marketplace. We're PepsiCo, we will grow. It works. It works until eventually the ecosystem you're operating in catches up, learns those rules. And if you do not reinvent yourself, you no longer continue to win, and that's when you start to losing. And I'm not going to stand here and give you lots of examples of famous companies that have eventually stopped reinventing themselves and disappeared off the planet. Just go back 50 years and what was composed of the Fortune 50 and what is Fortune 50 today, or Fortune 100, whichever way you want to look at it. So it is about reinvention, it's not about complacency. And reinvention is going to come along all these axes. So we had that challenge. We set about, and what Indra Nooyi did, if you think about it from a CPG industry is, and really credit to her, not myself, was to say, we're actually going to not look within this industry to find leadership to change this industry. We're going to go outside. So she goes and hires a crazy guy like me who's never worked in the CPG industry, never worked in the food and beverage industry, doesn't know anything about logistics and supply chain, works on a time horizon for R&D which is measured as a decade, not in weeks or quarters like I've just been hearing. We actually lived in an industry, and I've lived in an industry that you planned your SGP or your strat plan for the decade. And I come into the consumer industry, we're talking about not 10 years, but 10 weeks. And then you have to ask yourself, how are you going to out-innovate if all you're going to do is keep refreshing your brand? Because eventually the consumer starts to blur. So we set ourselves as a task. The first thing I did at PepsiCo was look outside and say, which is the talent I need from the outside, and who has the institutional knowledge that I need to build on? We set about doing that. And I'll talk about the process, but let me give you the results. Because one thing I did learn in business, it's just the numbers and the results. And it's not one quarter's results, it's consistent delivery of results. In 2000, in the early 2006 or so, our innovation-driven net revenue, that is top-line net revenue, when we were a $40 billion business, 30-some billion dollars, used to be 4 to 5%. Clearly not sufficient to sustain growth. growth that is expected of us as the quality business we are. We invested in R&D, we changed the processes, we brought in new talent, we completely rethought innovation end to end. As a result of that, let's ask ourselves where that went. 2012, 5 years later into that journey, innovation was 7% of top-line net revenue. 2013, it was 9%, 8%. 2014, it's now over 9%. 9+% of a $70 billion business, not a $40 billion business, which is what it was in 12. Now, if you think that 1% is trivial, 1% of $67 billion is almost $700 million of incremental net revenue growth. So we've been adding a percentage point every year of top-line revenue from innovation for the last several years. So I will not buy the premise that if you're big, you can't innovate and continue to grow from innovation. I don't buy it for a minute. In fact, you can do that. It's just the how. It's the leadership, the focus, and the organizational systems that you build and where you go for. So that's one number I want you to remember. The second we said is, how are we doing against our competition? I'm going to give you 3 metrics of that. 2013, in measured channel in the United States, the world's biggest market for food and beverage and consumer, our biggest market. If you look at the top 50 products that were launched by the entire industry, 9 came out of my organization. 9 out of the top 50 in 2013 were coming out of PepsiCo's R&D. It didn't stop. Well, so that must be just a one-off year. I just got 2014's numbers. 10 out of the top 50 in 2014 came out of my organization. It wasn't a one-off year. We had built the pipeline, we'd built the technology, we'd built the capabilities. It took 4 or so plus years to start to ramp up. And what was a 4 or 5% top-line innovation now had doubled. We were beating the competition. 20% of the entire industry's top launches were coming out of this organization. Year on year now. If you look at 2014, all measured retail sales in the United States out of food and beverage, PepsiCo gave retailers more innovation growth than any other company in the country. 7-Eleven chose PepsiCo this year as their top innovation partner in the country. For 50 years, PepsiCo has not had an account with Disney, right? That relationship was never ours. We could not outbid, we could not outprocure, we cannot outmarket our competition. The flagship Disney coming out in Shanghai, China, under construction today, will be a Pepsi account. That was innovation-driven relationship because we were finally winning accounts on innovation, technology, not just another color, another flavor, another package. So let me just stop and ask you to pause there and ask you, is it really true that you can be too big to stop to actually innovate? Absolutely not. So the question as the Chief Technology Officer, the Chief Scientist, and now my new role as the Vice Chairman of the company is, what is it that we call the secret sauce? Excuse the pun, given we're a snacks company. What is that secret sauce and how do you go about it? First of all, there's no magic to this. I've worked in 3 different industries. I've worked as practicing in medicine at the Mayo Clinic. I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and now I've worked in the chips and soda company. And as I look back, there are commonalities. First of all, you have to have the courage to challenge the norm. And if you don't have that courage, then in my opinion, you shouldn't be at the helm. Because then you're going to continue to do what you've always done, played the safe bet, And you have to take courage personally. In my case, it was giving up tenure as an academic and saying, oh, I'm going to go off to industry. It was when you're president of pharma R&D, you resign and you go off into a different industry. You have to have the courage. Take the risk. And that inspires your organization to say, you know what? If the old man wants us to do it, maybe we'll give it a shot. And you have to inspire that 40-something-year-old is critical, but I would argue the 40-something-year-old may not have the maturity and the balance to know which horses to bet. They certainly can come up with ideas that you can do. And I've made a career personally of never having come up with a single good idea in my entire career. I've been successful literally by recognizing everybody else's good idea. And that comes from maturity, experience, the knowledge, and saying, you know what? That one sounds like a good one. Let's go for it. And what leaders can do is bring resources to bear and take barriers out of the way of those 35-year-olds. So it isn't an either or, it's both. You need both. You need the new ideas. You need the I don't know what I don't know energy to say, let me challenge this, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. But at the same time, you've got to be able to have the credibility, the power, the authority, whatever term you want to use, and say, I'm going to do it. So the other part. However, look what else is happening in our world. The speed at which things are transferring as knowledge, the barriers to knowledge have essentially been eliminated. I sit on the board of a business school in Asia. I'm a member of the board of directors. Small school. They don't have anywhere near the resources that schools in this city have. Graduating class of 200. I had the honor of giving the convocation speech at this school recently. Graduating class of a few hundred students. They had 13 Fulbright scholars in that one graduating class. 13 Fulbright scholars in one graduating class of this little doohickey school in the, quote, third world. So we had better wake up. I grew up in England, went to school here in the United States, but you know, the world is changing. Because given the access to information, they can sit there and learn all the same things we ever did. There's no barrier to that knowledge, which is a good thing. Second, that means our competition, however, accessibility to ideas is broad, and as leaders, if we have tunnel vision and look for those ideas right underneath us, we will never find the opportunities that are out there. Which means if you're a global company, yes, you have scale, but you better create the mechanism to identify those ideas. So as a leader, you learn to recognize what they are, because you're going to miss 90% of them if all you're doing is looking in your backyard. Because today, your backyard is no longer yours. For us, 50% of our business is already essentially outside the U.S., and very rapidly, we will be bigger outside the U.S. than we will in the U.S. It's just a matter of months, if not a couple of years. Now, the challenge we have is that many of these markets work under different rules. And I'm not talking about laws. I'm talking about business operating rules. For example, they work off lower margins. They can price differently. Their consumer has different price points. They don't have our cost structure. So these companies that are in the developing world think differently. We have to learn to think differently. What does that mean? Well, let me give you a very simple. If you go in with your usual tried and tested method of how you built your market, and that's what we used to do. Here's our product. We know its formula. We'll create a concentrate. We'll go into your market. We'll create an operating plant. We'll produce the product. We'll ship it out, and then we'll sell it. And by the way, the same flavor is just about available to everybody. We had a one-size-fits-all mentality. But if you're going to now provide consumer products for the local people, of course, now you have this challenge and natural tension, scale and uniformity on the one hand, customization and deleverage of your scale on the other hand. You have to start innovating. So that's one challenge. The second is the speed at which you roll out is critical, not only because you've got to grow, But if you don't roll out fast enough, local competitors will identify what you're doing in one market, and they'll actually have launched it before you even get there. And IP is less and less a barrier than it used compared to what it used to be. Brand is, but ask anybody. Even if you're in the high-tech industry. Pharmaceutical business, I would see generics launch from Takeda's drugs in India before we even actually had launched them there. That is a reality of what we operate in. The third is, how do you bring technologies from other industries? So let me give you an example. I'll give you only a couple of examples today, given the time. One, we identified with our consumers, and let me just pause, the most critical skill in my mind is not how much engineering you have, how much biology you know, how much science you know. How good are you at understanding your consumer? It may not be the most glamorous part of your organization. It's something, oh, the mathematicians, the consumer insights people, they're usually hidden somewhere. The most critical part of your business, I don't care if you're in healthcare, in medicine, the most powerful part of the Mayo Clinic for the days I used to practice there was the experience at the front desk. That made or broke the experience of the patient, and understanding the patient exposure at the front desk, that consumer insight was critical. Whatever industry you're in, understand the consumer and understand your customer. They're not the same thing. As we understood our consumer, for this example, we heard from our consumers, I want a potato snack that's crunchier, has a thicker texture, has a different mouthfeel. But every country we went to, they wanted a different flavor. Now, here's how we used to do it, pre-2007. We would bring a group of chefs, product developers, they'd go into a lab, a culinary, they'd start slicing these potatoes, they'd fry them, test them. It'd take about 6 months. Then we'd try different seasonings. We'd go on a pilot line. Then we'd take them out. And eventually, CapEx for the cutters was approved, and we would actually roll them out into a lead market, test it for a year or two. By year 5, we were in 3 countries. By year 10, we were typically in a dozen countries. That's actually historical how we did it. And our lead countries would be FritoLay in North America, Walker's in the US, maybe Mexico, etc. So we came up with the idea of a product which is now globally under the platform of Deep Ridged. We brought on board computer modelers, people with computational science, computational biology, computational engineering, brought them together, sat them down with these chefs, and they completely modeled the potato chip design on a computer, created the cutters on a computer, modeled the processing on a computer, modeled the mouth experience, the crunch, the texture, the way it interacts with the saliva, all of that on a computer. Made the chip shapes using 3D printing, finalized 90% of the process in a few weeks on a computer before it had ever actually touched a potato. Having done that, we rapidly created the first round of the pilot line. It was 90-some% already ready. We launched it in the marketplace. Mike, do you have that slide? We were able to create patents on the cutter, on the texture, on the mouth experience. All of this was digital and therefore quantified. Multiple patents were created, and we launched it in 22 countries in 24 months. We were building a new line with a new launch every 30 days. Unprecedented for us, and I doubt for anybody else, given we're the biggest snacks player in the world. We had gone from a 10-year process to actually a 12-month process. Simultaneous marketing campaign, simultaneous development, and we call this our chassis versus the... Now we added the seasoning based on local consumer work, and the consumer teams were doing the seasoning consumer insights work as the product was being designed. So we were designing the chassis while they're doing the seasoning experience. Comes together, out. So now we have 22 top markets already launched, which creates a barrier to entry. Who's going to tell me that big is not innovative? Okay? Now, this wasn't traditional FritoLay experience because we at FritoLay know snacks. This was bringing in engineers who had never worked on this industry. This was being mathematicians who had never worked in the CPG industry. But my premise was very simple. I'm a pilot. You can design, fly a plane without ever actually sitting in one. The industry's already done this. You can design a car. The Mazda Miata was completely designed on a Cray computer more than 15 years ago. Why are we still living in dinosaur land? Pharmaceuticals are developing drug targets, ligands on a computer. Why are we still living in dinosaur land? Change the premise. Take a risk. Have the courage. Let me go to another example. These ideas do not come from the C-suite or the corner office. If ideation in your company is coming from the senior-most person, fire that person. You got the wrong person at the top of the helm. The ideas need to come from your organization. Now the question is how you're going to do it. So I was on a visit in Brazil. Young engineer, you know, the sort of typical, the vice chairman or whoever's come to the region, and all the senior management stack up from the BU president along saying, well, let's be careful which slides are shown, you know, corporate headquarters is here. For God's sake, keep that guy out of the way. So in this meeting, I had one of these guys who actually didn't know how to take no for an answer, so he was put in the farthest back row, but he was good. So somewhere along the line, he, in the premise of asking a question, and I could see from the frowns of everybody else going, I thought we told him to take a vacation. He says, Dr. Cohn, why don't we manufacture our products closer to our consumers? I said, well, what do you mean? Let's have lunch. Because it was a question I'd been wondering. And then instead of getting rid of him out of the room, I said, listen, guys, I want to have lunch with him. And I just knew from the faces. But you know what? When you've got enough gray hairs and you sit at headquarters, you can sort of make requests and nobody is going to debate that one. I said, I want to have lunch with him alone. So I did. I said, tell me what you're thinking. He says, well, do you know the average speed of one of our delivery trucks in Sao Paulo? I said, I got a ballpark, but I don't know exactly. He said 4 kilometers an hour. Well, you got a population of 17 million. You got 50 kilometers from the perimeter down here. You do a little bit of arithmetic, and it takes you 10 hours for your truck to go from the outside into the city. That's not just Sao Paulo, Shanghai, Mumbai, Calcutta, Rio, wherever you go, wherever there's a mega city, we have gridlock. Wherever we have gridlock, we have a problem. Our traditional distribution system doesn't work anymore, right? I don't care which industry you're in. If you're trying to reach the consumer in the heart of the city, your model of shipping something from Dallas up Interstate 35 in 600 miles in 10 hours doesn't work. Well, that's a problem because where's all the growth happening? By 2050, 70% of the population of 9 billion people will be living in cities. That's 7 billion people. What are you going to do? The fastest growing population is where? It's not in suburbs and rural. It's actually in mega cities. Even aging people are moving back into the city. What are we going to do? Well, you can do nothing and you don't have a sustainable business, or you can start innovating. I'm just going to give you one example. We've got lots of things going on. And by the way, maybe we'll have drones fly into every high-rise. I don't know. Maybe we won't. And even if drones do, can you imagine how many gazillion drones are going to be flying around over Manhattan? That'll be interesting. So let's not hope that that's the solution right now. And maybe I've got a U.S. Army pilot sitting here. Maybe the Army might have an opinion on whether we're going to have these drones or what the heck they're going to be dropping. So I said, let's look at this way. He said, if any of you have ever seen a food production line, it's about the size of a football field. It's about 100 meters. You can't put that one in the middle of Sao Paulo or Manhattan or even downtown Boston. He says, Mehmood, what if we were to actually try and miniaturize the entire production line. Now that's fascinating to me, because I don't know enough about the engineering of this. So of course, when you're that dumb, you just say, that sounds like a great idea. So I did. So I went to the engineers, who immediately balked and sat down with me and talked to the head of engineering, who came, sat down with my office, had a cup of coffee, said, Mehmood, we should talk. We talked, and he said, you know what? Do you know about the food safety rules, the regulations, the flow, temperature curves, the pressures? It isn't simply just take the same thing, shrink it down by 1/10, and you got an answer. I said, yeah, but you know what? When I was in practice, they were doing mammograms on trucks. And if you go to India, they do cataract surgery on a bus. Why can't we do this? So guess what? 12 months running, no problems, no safety issues, no regulatory issues, constant, no breakdowns. We took a traditional major manufacturing line, shrunk it down to fit on a 16-wheel truck, including the quality lab, designed it so that the lowest educated worker could use it, put it in downtown Detroit, hired local people to run the line. Inputs are electricity, water, and raw ingredients. Output is packaged product, goes straight into a box, into a warehouse, sold in the same neighborhood. Distribution distance, a few hundred yards. If you're in the supply chain business, guys, it's either a no shit moment or you better start thinking again, right? I don't know if this is scalable. I don't know if it's work. I wanted to show you this because until you challenge that 100-year norm of the business you're in, because we just asked ourselves the question, we historically said we are in the business of make, move, and sell. We're suddenly in the business of make and sell. Do you know what that says for test markets, capital allocation, distribution systems? What is this CapEx? Is it fixed assets? Is it transportation capital? Do I give a shit? Does it really matter? Are we going to design our innovation around our traditional financial structure? Or are we going to design our innovation around the consumer and the reality of the business we're in, and then figure out the financials around that? Do you understand my point? And that takes not only being small and nimble and this and that and the other, it takes depth and expertise and breadth and capabilities of a whole variety of technologies that you bring to bear. Not just internally, but externally. And one of the last two messages I want to leave you with, this cannot be done by any one company on their own. In the last 4 years, ending in 2014, in 48 months, I signed 50 different contracts with external companies, technologists, suppliers, partners. Got a great partner sitting here at DSM as an example. All of these partnerships, the power and the capability of a consumer company is to bring them all together. At the end of the day, you can compile these technologies for the consumer in a way that no one technology player can. But you have to have the vision, the courage, and the resources. Most of them, importantly, is the talent. And the last example I want to give you is very quickly, deliberately, show me Kickstart there, Mike. Imagine the environment we're in. My team and marketing are told the carbonated soft drink business is declining, beverages is a bear, no growth, blah, 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 right? You've heard it all. I'm talking about the US. However, we talked to our consumers and they said, listen, there's a bunch of consumers who don't drink coffee in the morning, don't want an energy drink because of its sugar and baggage and all the rest of it. They like the taste of fruit. Give us a product. So we created Kickstart with unique IP. It's never been copied because we have a lot of patents. Coming out of our flavor biology team, I don't need to go into that. It doesn't matter. You're all business leaders. In the middle of that environment, in 2012, we launched Kickstart. First year in the market, not only as it exceeds $100 million in sales in the US alone, it is the biggest beverage launch in a decade. Year 2, it exceeds 200 million. Year 3, it is on track to exceed 250 million. So By the end of its third year, it will have seen in excess of $750 million in sales, which are margin accretive to our other CSDs. You want to see the CEO happy? So you tell me that if I had our team sat there and said, whoever works on CSD innovation, there's no growth, there's nobody wants it, consumers walking away, blah, 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 you might as well take your antidepressants and go home. Or you say no. The consumer has moved on, still is looking for innovation. You either have the courage and the brains to find it, or you're complacent. And I would submit to you, there is proof. This was, by the way, in 2013, just one of $600 million launches. 6 separate products that we launched, $100 million first year on the market, 6 times. So let me leave you with a thought. Be clear in what you want to achieve. Have clarity and vision in your leadership, and have the courage to hire the right talent. Look outside your organization as much as you look inside your organization. And most of all, be critical on how you put the pieces together, because it is the sum of the parts that creates innovation. There is no magic widget that any one supplier or any one department or any one lab is magically going to come up with. That only happens in drug development. Unless you're in that business, I don't care if you're automotive, aviation, consumer goods, you are typically going to be winning because you figured out how to put all the pieces together. And when you do, even in times when the industry is challenged, you will grow, and you will grow not only winning, you will grow even better than you did in history. Thank you very much.